Lieutenant Commander Eric Vance stepped off the dropship and into the biting wind of Velthora the Ninth, a frozen moon locked in silence for thousands of years. The sky above was pale and endless, with storm clouds swirling in the distance like angry spirits. His boots crunched against the icy surface as he moved away from the landing zone, his breath fogging inside the helmet. The Galactic Concord had marked this moon as a minor archaeological site, buried and forgotten. But new scans from a Terran deep-range probe had shown something strange, a structure beneath the southern pole, perfectly symmetrical, untouched by time. Eric volunteered to check it out, partly because he was curious, and partly because he had always trusted his gut, and his gut told him something important was buried here. He followed the signal beacon through a maze of jagged ice, descending deeper into a crevasse that yawned like a mouth waiting to swallow him. At the bottom, a smooth black surface shimmered under a thin sheet of frost. It was alien, clearly, not natural, and cold enough to bite through his gloves. As he wiped the surface, ancient glyphs began to glow faintly beneath his touch, reacting not to heat, but to him. Eric frowned, stepping back, and watched in amazement as the wall began to shift, folding inward with a deep, rumbling groan. The ice cracked above him, but the structure remained solid, ancient tech holding firm. He raised his weapon on instinct and stepped inside. The air changed immediately warmer, breathable, strangely still. Light flickered along the edges of the smooth hallway, illuminating engravings of stars, battles, and a tall figure with a crown of light. He followed the corridor down into the earth, deeper than any moon base should reach, until he reached a large chamber with a domed ceiling. In the center stood a single pod, resting on a platform surrounded by floating symbols. The pod was sealed, but clear, and inside it lay a figure tall, elegant, with silver markings across her skin and long, flowing white hair spread around her like a halo. She looked human, but not quite. Eric's breath caught in his throat. The pod began to hiss softly. Lights above blinked in sequence, as if recognizing him. The console to his right pulsed blue, waiting. He reached out and placed his hand on it. The symbols shifted again. Then a voice, soft and musical, spoke from nowhere in perfect English. Biometric match confirmed. Protocol Kellerani activated. The pod released a final puff of steam and opened with a quiet gasp. Eric stepped back, weapon raised, heart pounding. The woman inside stirred. Her eyes opened bright gold with a depth that seemed ancient and infinite. She sat up slowly, looked around, then focused on him. Her lips moved, and to his shock, she said, "Eric, Vance of Soul, you've come." Eric froze. The room was utterly silent, except for the hum of unseen machinery. How did she know his name? Was this a setup? He scanned for signals, not just him, her, and whatever secrets this vault still held. She stood, a bit shaky, and looked around, as if seeing ghosts. Then she turned back to him and said, "I've waited a long time." Before he could respond, the ground trembled slightly, and a series of warning lights flickered red around the chamber's edge. A tease. The vault had detected something else. Eric tapped his comno signal. Something was interfering with the transmission. The woman stepped forward, placing a hand on his chest, not threatening, but familiar. "They followed the awakening," she whispered. "They always do." Eric didn't understand, but the way her eyes darted toward the ceiling made him instinctively raise his weapon again. He looked up. The glyphs overhead were changing, shifting into warning signs, some kind of alert system. Then, from above, the faintest echo of an engine too sharp, too cold. A ship, not theirs. The woman looked at him with fierce intensity. "We must go, now, or we both die." Eric didn't need convincing as he helped her toward the exit. He took one last look at the pod. His instincts were screaming, now not in fear, but in awareness. Something had just begun, something far bigger than a routine exploration. And somehow, impossibly, he was at the center of it. Eric moved quickly through the dim hallway, guiding the strange woman as red warning lights blinked along the walls, like eyes slowly waking from a deep sleep. And every step echoed in a silence that felt ready to shatter. The cold from outside was gone, but a different chill crept in this one, made of nerves, fear, and a strange sense of purpose he couldn't explain. The woman stayed close beside him, her steps slow but graceful, like someone who had not walked for centuries but had not forgotten how. He kept looking over his shoulder, waiting for anything to chase them, but the corridor behind them remained empty. Still, the alarms had not stopped. "Who are you?" he finally asked, his voice low. She looked at him, her golden eyes glowing faintly in the dark, and said, "I am Kellara, daughter of the last High Sovereign of Thalzun, keeper of the Starseed, and heir to the lost flame of the Void." Her voice was calm, almost too calm. Eric didn't understand most of it, but he remembered what mattered. She had spoken his name before he gave it. "How do you know who I am?" he asked, eyes narrowing. She paused as they reached a chamber with a curved wall covered in glowing symbols. With one soft touch, the wall rippled like water, and dozens of bright glyphs lit up, forming a circle of light around them. "I know you because you are the one I was meant to meet," she said. "You were chosen long before your time." Eric stepped back, feeling unease rise in his chest. He had heard strange things before, prophecies, legends, alien riddles, but this felt different, too personal. "I wasn't chosen," he said firmly. "I'm just here to scan a ruin and report back. I don't believe in destiny." Kellara smiled faintly, as if she had heard that many times before. "Belief does not change what is written," she said. Before Eric could press further, a loud metallic thump echoed through the corridor ahead. He raised his rifle instantly, stepping in front of her. The thump came again, closer this time. Kelara's expression turned serious. "They have landed," she whispered. "The hunters." Eric didn't like the sound of that. He motioned for her to stay low and moved forward, weapon ready. As he peeked around the corner, he saw a flash of movement, sleek black machines crawling along the walls like insects, their limbs sharp and their eyes glowing with blue light. He had never seen anything like them, but his instincts screamed, "Danger! Back! This way!" he hissed. They turned and ran, the machines shrieking in mechanical tones as they gave chase. The walls ahead lit up again under Kelara's hands, opening another path. They darted through it just in time, a door slamming shut behind them. Eric's heart pounded, his body tense. "What are those things?" he asked. "Cedric hunters," she replied. "Killers created to wipe out my kind. They do not stop. They do not fear. They are machines, but they serve something worse." The hallway opened into another chamber, this one filled with long dead machines and cracked crystal panels. Kellara moved to a central pillar and pressed her palm against it. A soft hum filled the air. The machines lit up briefly, then dimmed. "This place is old," she said, "but it still remembers." Eric looked around, unsure what that meant. "Why are they after you?" he asked. She looked at him with sad eyes. "'Cause I carry the last piece of something they were made to destroy. A key, a memory, seed." He didn't fully understand, but something in her voice told him it didn't matter. The only thing that mattered now was survival. The chamber's walls began to glow again, this time showing images of stars, fleets, and then a massive explosion. Eric watched, silent, as an empire fell in flickering light. "This is what they did," Kellara said softly. "To my world, to my people, they erased us." Eric swallowed hard. "And now they're coming for Earth." She nodded. "If they know you helped me, they will follow you. They always follow the key. Sound from behind made them both turn, metal scraping, followed by the sharp click of something crawling. Move, Eric shouted. They sprinted toward the far door, Kalira leading this time. Her hand touched another panel, and the wall peeled open like paper. They rushed through as another machine burst from the shadows. Eric turned and fired, the blast striking its core, but it barely slowed down. It lunged at him, claws reaching, but Kalira raised her hand and a pulse of blue energy knocked it off its feet. It slammed into the wall and shattered. Eric looked at her in shock. You could do that the whole time. She didn't answer. Her face was pale and her body trembled. Only once, she said. It takes more than I have left. Eric caught her as she stumbled, helping her stand. We need to get out of here, he said. There's an old uplink tower near the ice ridge. If I can reach it, I might be able to call for evac. Kalira nodded weakly. Then we go. They made their way back up through the winding corridors, every shadow now a threat, every sound a warning. Eric stayed alert, his mind racing. Who had built this place? Why was it reacting to him? And why did it feel like his life had just changed forever? As they neared the exit, Kalira looked at him again. You're not just a soldier, she said. You are a bridge between what was and what may come. Eric didn't know what to say, so he said nothing, just kept moving, one step at a time, with the cold wind waiting just beyond the vault's mouth and the knowledge that the galaxy was far more dangerous and far more mysterious than he had ever believed. The frozen wind screamed as Eric and Kalira stepped out of the vault and into the blinding snowstorm. The world outside, now a blur of ice and noise. But what caught Eric's attention wasn't the cold, it was the sound above them, a sharp whine cutting through the storm like a blade, followed by another, deeper sound, like a massive engine powering up overhead. Eric looked up, squinting through the falling snow, and his heart dropped. Shadows moved in the clouds, long, sleek shapes that didn't belong to the Concord fleet or any Terran vessel he knew. 3 ships broke through the storm like dark birds of prey, sharp-edged and silent as death, their hulls black and smooth with glowing red markings pulsing like veins. Kalira stared at them with dread, her voice quiet but firm. Hunter ships. They have found me. The largest ship hovered directly above the vault, and without warning, it released a flash of red light toward the ground. A deep vibration shook the ice beneath their feet, and several thin, synth-like machines began to descend on thin beams of light, their legs unfolding as they landed, scanning the area with blue sensors. Eric grabbed Kalira's hand, pulling her behind a snowbank, barely avoiding a sweep of light that passed over the vault entrance. We need to move now, he whispered. Kalira nodded, her breath fast, her strength still not fully returned. They kept low and moved across the frozen ground, the storm giving them just enough cover to avoid the searchlights. But Eric could hear the machines walking near the crunch of ice under clawed feet, the mechanical clicks and bursts of static that sounded almost like speech. He remembered what she had called them, Sidrak hunters machines built for war, for extermination, for one purpose, to destroy anything connected to her ancient race. As they moved, Eric's mind raced, trying to remember the terrain. Uplink Tower wasn't far, a kilometer east, but the wind and ice made every step slow and dangerous. They reached a small ridge, and from there, Eric could see the machines spreading out. One of them stopped and turned its head sharply toward their direction. Eric pulled Kalira down just in time as a blue laser passed inches over his back. The machine let out a screeching signal, and instantly, 2 others turned toward them. Run! Eric shouted, and they bolted from the ridge, sliding down the icy slope with Kalira stumbling behind. He fired a shot at the closest machine. It sparked and stumbled, but didn't stop. The ground shook again as another beam from the ship struck nearby, melting part of the snow and revealing more of the vault's buried structure. Clara glanced back, eyes wide with fear and memory. God, they want the vault destroyed, she said, breathless. They don't want me hidden again. Eric knew they wouldn't survive a straight fight, not without help. We get to the tower, he said. I'll send a distress signal. My fleet will come. But Clara hesitated. They will trace the signal, good, Eric said through clenched teeth. Let them. But I'm not letting them take you. They reached a narrow ravine, and Eric helped her across the slick surface. Dan climbed to the top of a frozen ledge where he could see the old uplink tower in the distance, a tall, rusted structure half buried in snow, its long antenna bent, but still standing. He felt hope for the first time, but it was short-lived. Behind them, one of the hunter ships began to change shape, its underside opening like a jaw, revealing what looked like a pod lined with spikes and blue energy. Clara's eyes widened. They're deploying a scourge drone. It will burn the entire field. Eric didn't know what that was, but it sounded bad. They moved faster, running the last stretch toward the tower as the drone launched into the sky, spinning as it glowed brighter. Eric reached the base of the tower and ripped open the access panel. It was dead. No power. Damn it, he muttered, pulling tools from his belt. Clara knelt beside him, placing her hand on the panel. A soft pulse of light moved from her fingers into the metal, and slowly the console flickered to life. You've got magic fingers, Eric said, trying to keep calm, though he could hear the drone's whine getting louder. Not magic, she whispered, just old knowledge. He typed quickly, setting up a wide-range emergency beacon, overriding every encryption protocol he knew. This is Lieutenant Commander Eric Vance, Terran Navy, code 3902. I'm under attack on Velthora X. I repeat, this is an emergency hostile unknown force, requesting immediate extraction. The console blinked, showing the signal had been sent, but there was no guarantee anyone would answer in time. Clara looked up. The drone was almost on them. It's going to release fire, she said. Not real fire, but molecular flame. It eats everything. Eric looked around, then spotted a collapsed piece of structure nearby, an old maintenance shaft, just big enough for them to fit inside. He grabbed her hand and pulled her toward it. In here. They dove inside, just as the drone unleashed a beam of burning light across the tower, vaporizing the snow and melting the ice like wax under a blowtorch. The world above them shook, and Eric covered Clara with his body as the heat washed over the shaft's entrance. Then, silence. Smoke and ash drifted down like gray snowflakes. Eric slowly looked up, his ears ringing. The tower was scorched, but still upright. Ket, that was too close, he muttered, coughing. Clara sat up, looking pale but alive. They won't stop, she said. They'll keep searching. Let them, Eric said, because help is coming. It has to. But deep inside, he wondered, what if it didn't? What if they were alone out here, on a frozen moon, with ancient enemies waking from sleep, and machines that couldn't be reasoned with? He checked his rifle, 2 charges left. Not enough. Still, he stood and helped Clara up. We'll move again at nightfall, he said. We find better cover. We wait for pickup. And if they come before then, he looked up at the sky, now darkening, as clouds thickened once more. Then we give them a reason to regret waking you. Clara met his gaze and nodded slowly. The storm returned, hiding them from view, as the hunter ships circled high above like vultures, waiting for a sign. But Eric had no plans to die on this moon, not yet. The storm raged across the ice plains, howling like a living thing as Eric and Clara crouched in the remains of a burned-out supply pod buried beneath the snow. The metal walls, scorched from the drone's fire, the air thick with cold and silence, broken only by the soft hum of the emergency signal, still pulsing weakly from the uplink tower they had nearly died protecting. Eric checked his wrist console for the 100th time, praying for a reply, even static. But the screen showed nothing except a blinking signal sent message. And that emptiness weighed on him like the cold itself. But Kalira sat with her eyes closed, her breathing slow, her body wrapped in a ragged thermal blanket he'd salvaged. And though she looked still and calm, he could feel something building inside her. Like a current charging in the dark, a storm of its own, ready to break. He didn't understand what she was or what power she truly carried. But every time she touched the ancient tech, the ruins answered her, like they remembered her voice. And he couldn't help but wonder if the same was happening to her now. Then, without warning, her eyes opened, glowing faintly gold in the dim shelter. And she spoke with a voice that was not just hers, but something older, deeper. "They are listening," she whispered. And Eric felt a chill, not from the snow, but from something unseen pressing against the edge of their space. As if the act of calling for help had reached not only his people, but something else out there, something ancient, something watching. And Kalira continued, her gaze distant. "Your signal passed beyond the stars, through the veil." Something stirred. He leaned closer, frowning. "What do you mean, stirred?" But she didn't answer right away. Instead, she slowly reached into the small satchel that had never left her side and pulled out a silver shard that shimmered with soft light. And Eric watched, frozen, as she held it to her chest, then pressed it gently to the floor of the pot instantly. The ground vibrated, and the air filled with a low harmonic hum, the kind that made your bones shake and the hair on your neck rise. And before Eric could speak, the shard lit up and projected a floating image above them. A constellation of stars swirling and rotating until one glowed brighter than the rest. It was a system Eric recognized, but barely, from ancient charts and explorer records. A dead system with a collapsed sun and no known life. Yet the shard pulsed again, sending a thin line of light from the star map toward Kalira's forehead, touching her like a thread of energy. And her voice returned, stronger now, layered with something alien. "They know I am awake, and they are coming, not just the hunters, but those who once stood against them." And as she finished, the shard dimmed, fell still, and the strange hum faded into the cold silence once more, leaving Eric stunned, trying to make sense of what he'd just seen before he could question her further. His wrist console buzzed just once, sharp and sudden, and he looked down to see a flicker of green across the screen, the word ping flashing for half a second before disappearing. Again his breath caught, eyes wide. That was a response. "Someone heard us," he said quickly, adjusting the frequency and trying to re-establish contact, his fingers working fast, the console now picking up faint pulses, like someone tapping back from deep space, but distorted by the storm. And Kalira moved closer, her presence strangely grounding as he worked. Suddenly, a voice burst through the static, garbled but human. ... Eric Vance. Repeat coordinates. Threat signal verified. Assistance en route. Hold. And Eric let out a sharp breath, a wave of relief crashing over him. But Kalira remained tense, staring at the sky through a crack in the pod roof, where the clouds had begun to swirl unnaturally above, spinning like a vortex. Eric stood slowly, his rifle ready, his joy now mixed with worry. Help was coming. Yes, but would it arrive in time? And more importantly, was that signal truly safe? Kay heard it too, Kalira said, her voice low. The signal reached both the saviors and the destroyers. Now it becomes a race. And just as she spoke, a deep, metallic groan echoed across the landscape, followed by a sudden flash on the horizon. The dark hunter ships were moving again, their shapes larger, closer, the lead vessel now unfolding, strange structures along its sides, like wings or weapons. Okay. and Eric knew instinctively they were preparing for something big. Something final. A purge, maybe, to destroy whatever remained of the vault and anything that had touched it, including them. Kalira clutched the silver shard tightly, as if bracing for the worst. And Eric motioned for her to follow. "We can't stay here," he said. "They'll hit this site again." And they sprinted across the icy plain toward a small cave formation he'd noticed earlier, one that might give them cover until the rescue team arrived. But as they ran, the sky cracked above them, thin bolt of red energy shooting down and striking the pod behind them with a thunderous explosion, sending fire and snow high into the air and flattening both of them to the ground. Eric rolled over, coughing, ears ringing. His helmet visor cracked, and Kalira groaned beside him, her hands glowing faintly as she shielded them from the worst of the heat. But it was clear the hunters had locked onto them again, and time was running short. They crawled into the cave, deeper into the rock, where the air was warmer and the wind couldn't reach, and Eric looked at her, worry on his face. "How much longer?" he asked, and she closed her eyes. The shard pressed to her chest again, a little more. If they are real, and Eric knew what she meant, he had called for help. But in this place, on this moon, touched by lost empires and alien technology, nothing could be trusted completely, and the line between enemy and ally blurred like the storm outside. Suddenly, the shard in Kalira's hands pulsed again, brighter this time, and she gasped. "They're close." But so are the others, and Eric rose, rifle in hand, eyes on the mouth of the cave, where shadows danced in the snow, and in the distance came the low rumble of engines, not hunter machines, but something faster, cleaner, sharper. And hope sparked in his chest as a blue light cut through the storm, growing brighter by the second. The storm thinned as the sky above the frozen valley began to glow with a soft, unnatural light, not from the sun, but from the strange vessel descending through the snow clouds like a falling star, smooth, silver blue, and silent, its shape unlike any human craft, more like a blade wrapped in light, humming with deep power. Eric stood at the mouth of the cave, rifle raised, but heart pounding with something that felt like hope and fear tangled together. And Kalira beside him seemed to grow taller as the ship neared, her golden eyes shining brighter than ever before, her breath steady, her grip tight on the glowing shard that pulsed in time with the approaching vessels. The ship touched down. The snow around it melted in a perfect circle, and the storm died completely, replaced by a heavy stillness that pressed against the air like a silent warning. Eric took a step forward, but Kalira stopped him with a gentle touch, voice calm, yet full of something old and heavy. "She has come, the Queen of Fire." And before Eric could ask what that meant, the ship's side opened in a slow, elegant motion, and a figure stepped out tall, wrapped in armor of gleaming red and gold, her hair like burning strands of sunlight, her face sharp and fierce, and her eyes were just like Kalira's, but deeper, harder, like fire frozen into crystal. The woman walked across the snow without leaving footprints, and the very air seemed to shift around her, warmer with each step, and when she reached them, she looked directly at Kalira and spoke in a language Eric couldn't understand, a sound like wind through flames. But Kalira responded without hesitation, her voice lower, softer, full of respect. And though Eric didn't know the words, he could feel the meaning. This was no enemy, but not quite an ally either. This was someone from Kalira's past, someone powerful, someone who had once ruled or fought or lost everything, and now stood between their survival and the coming storm. Finally, the woman turned to Eric, her eyes narrowing slightly, and then she spoke in perfect English, her voice rich like heat from a forge. "You carried the signal spark and the last of the Starborn." And Eric nodded slowly, still gripping his rifle, but lowering it out of instinct. "I sent the call, but she brought the power," he said, glancing at Kalira, who now stood fully upright, her face clear of fear, her strength returning. And the Fire Queen, if that's what she was, smiled faintly, not with warmth, but with grim understanding. The signal woke more than allies. The hunters prepared to burn this world, she said, and, as if her words summoned it, the ground shook suddenly. Distant thunder rolling across the ice as the dark hunter ships in the sky began to gather above the vault again. Their weapons glowing red, their forms shifting as new limbs and weapons extended from their hulls. The Fire Queen raised her hand, and from her ship rose a shield of pure light, spreading outward to cover the valley, and the first beam from the hunter flagship struck it and shattered into sparks, the sky lighting up with fire and screams of machines that weren't alive but still felt rage. Kalira stepped forward and touched the Queen's arm, and something passed between them, energy, memory, maybe a command, and then the Queen nodded once, turned, and walked back toward her ship, where several more figures now emerged, warriors, in armor like hers, eyes glowing, weapons humming with the same strange fire. Eric watched, amazed, as Kalira turned to him, her voice strong again. I was hidden because they feared what I might become, but I remember now. I was not only a princess, she said, lifting the shard high, which burst into a tower of golden flame. I was born to inherit the flame, and at that moment, the sky split again, not from enemy fire, but from the arrival of another Forza Terran battlecruiser, huge and gray and familiar, descending like a mountain wrapped in thunder, its guns already turning toward the hunter ships. And Eric's chest swelled with a feeling close to triumph. His message had truly reached home, and now everything was about to change. The Fire Queen's forces surged forward, shields up, weapons blasting blue and orange light into the rising darkness as the hunters screamed in reply, pouring from the sky like a black storm, their drones swarming, their beams cutting through the air, and in the middle of it all stood Kalira, surrounded by light, her body now glowing with heat and energy, the ice around her melting in a perfect circle. Eric stayed by her side, firing at anything that moved too close, yelling into his come as the Terran Marines deployed on drop pods like falling stars, slamming into the battlefield with shockwaves that shattered the snow and sent hunter drones flying. But Eric could tell this wasn't just a battle of guns and ships. It was something deeper, a war of ancient power and new life, of forgotten queens and buried truths. And Kalira was not just surviving it, she was becoming part of it. Flames burst from her hands, shaped like blades, like shields, dancing through the air and slashing through enemies that tried to reach them. And the Fire Queen watched with pride, her warriors cutting down the hunters with swift, brutal precision. Suddenly, the ground cracked near the vault, and a massive figure rose taller than the others, shaped like a hunter, but larger, stronger, and pulsing with black light, its body wrapped in living armor, its eyes glowing red like dying suns. And Kalira froze, whispering, "The Dread One." He followed us, and Eric grabbed her arm. "What is it?" But she didn't answer, her focus locked on the beast, which now marched toward them through fire and falling wreckage. And the Fire Queen stepped forward, raising both hands, summoning a storm of flame around her that lit up the sky. But even that seemed not enough to stop the Dread One, who roared with a sound that cracked stone and made the Terran soldiers stagger back. Kalira took a breath and stepped in front of Eric, her voice calm. "This was why I was hidden," she said softly, "not to keep me safe, but to give me time." And with that, she lifted the shard high and shattered it with her bare hand. Explosion of golden light that followed sent Eric flying, blinded him for a heartbeat. But when he blinked the fire away, Kira stood in the air above the battlefield, her body wrapped in light and flames, her voice ringing out across the frozen world like a star being born. "I am not the last of my kind. I am the first of the new. And the fire surged from her like a wave, engulfing the dread one, the sky, the ruins, burning away darkness and casting shadows into the stars. The light from Kalira's explosion still glowed across the ruined sky, golden fire burning through the clouds as the last of the hunter fleet screamed and fell from orbit. Their black wings melting in the blaze that had erupted from her broken shard. Eric stood at the edge of the battlefield, armor scorched, breath short, staring upward in silence as Kalira hovered in the air like a sun reborn, flames circling her like a living shield. And her eyes now brighter than ever before, full of power, memory, and something deeper, something eternal, like she had become more than herself, more than a lost princess or a star-born survivor. She was now the beginning of something new. Something the old enemies had tried to bury, but had failed to destroy. Across the icy plain, the Terran Marines stood frozen, their weapons lowered, their helmets tilted upward as they watched the firestorm rip through the last enemy dreadships, the sky turning clear for the first time in hours, revealing the stars above, silent witnesses to a battle long written in lost histories. Kalira slowly descended, her flames dimming but never fading, and as she touched the ground, the ice beneath her melted into water, and tiny green sprouts began to grow where her feet landed, strange and beautiful, like the memory of a world long gone. Returning in fragments, Eric stepped forward, his eyes wide, unsure what to say, and she turned to him with a tired but warm smile. The first real smile he'd seen from her since the vault opened, and it felt like the sun had returned to the frozen moon. The Fire Queen approached next, her red armor now dulled with ash and scars, but her steps steady, her warriors close behind her. And she looked at Kalira with something like pride and sorrow mixed together, then bowed slowly, not with obedience, but with respect, deep and true. And Kalira returned the gesture, smaller but equally solemn. Eric noticed the battlefield was silent now, not just from the end of the fighting, but as if the world itself was holding its breath, waiting for whatever came next. Kalira spoke then, her voice clear and soft. The last spark was hidden inside me, not just to awaken the flame, but to carry it forward. And she looked around at the Terrans, the fire warriors, the smoking wreckage of the vault, and the new green life pushing up through the melting snow. I am not the only one. There will be others, she whispered, and Eric felt a chill. Not from the cold, but from the truth in her voice, like the future had just opened a door no one could close. A soft chime came from his wrist console then, and he looked down to see a signal flashing an open link from the Terran command ship, now in orbit, requesting a direct line to him, to her, and he tapped it, voice shaking. Eric Vance, still alive. The Starborn is with me, and a voice reply, steady and official, but edged with wonder. We saw the fire from orbit, Aga. And Kalira looked to him, then to the Fire Queen, and finally shook her head. No, nah. Yet, she said, and Eric relayed the message, watching the reply come through, acknowledged. We will remain in orbit, awaiting your next signal. And with that, the link faded, and the silence returned. Kalira walked to the heart of the battlefield, where the remains of the Dread One still smoldered. A blackened crater where something dark and ancient had stood, now empty, and she stood at its edge, closed her eyes, and breathed out a single flame, a small, soft spark that floated down and settled in the center. Not to destroy, but to seal, to protect, to guard against anything that might try to rise again. The Fire Queen stepped beside her and said quietly, the first flame has returned, but it must be carried forward. And Kalira nodded, understanding, passing between them without need for words. And then she turned back to Eric, her voice a little softer now, a little more human. Will you help me? And he didn't need time to think, didn't need to weigh the risk. He simply nodded. Always. And she smiled again. From the Fire Queen's ship, New technology was brought forth, devices shaped like seeds and stars, pieces of ancient systems that could restore life to dead worlds, rebuild what war had broken, and Kalira placed the first seed into the ground, her hand glowing as she pressed it into the earth. And light spread outward, warm and golden, across the valley, melting ice, waking soil, and where the snow had been dead and cold, warmth began to rise, and wind carried not just chill but scent of flowers, of life, of beginning. The Terrans watched in awe, and even the fire warriors, ancient and hardened, seemed moved by the rebirth starting beneath their feet. Eric knew then that this moon would not be forgotten, not as a battlefield, but as a birthplace, a place where the last spark became the first flame, where the lost became leaders, not through bloodline or weapon, but by lighting the darkness with something new. Kalira looked to the stars above, and the fire around her dimmed just slightly, like it had found peace, and she whispered, "There are more like me. I can feel them, waiting, hidden, afraid." And Eric said, "Then, let's go find them." And she nodded slowly. The Fire Queen approached once more, handed Kalira a small device, and said, "This leads to the archive, what remains of the old alliance." And with that, she and her warriors began to return to their ship. Their task complete for now, their part in the story ending as Kalira's began anew. Eric turned toward the Terran shuttle that landed nearby, ready to take them to the orbiting ship, to safety, to a new mission. And as Kalira stepped aboard beside him, she looked back one last time at the battlefield behind her, now blooming with faint green, and said, "This is only the first flame." And as the ship rose into the sky, leaving behind the ruined ice and glowing valley, Eric felt it to not an ending, but the start of something vast, something full of danger and hope and fire. And he smiled, because for the first time in his life, he knew he was part of something bigger, something meant to burn through the darkness and light the stars once more.